but two, even to respond to it. And that's clearly, there's a separate question at hand on how this even got to the point where it's at, where you're having to address it. But needless to say, what's happened has happened, and we're in the place where we're at, and that is that the practical effect of what they have done was that we, as a city, are losing $1.8 million of our general fund, of our general fund. It's one of the revenue streams that feeds our general fund, or 22% of our general fund, to put a percentage to it. And what they've done is they've shifted our vehicle license fee revenue stream that typically comes to us in the month of August at payments made, and they've shifted that over to what they refer to as their, I had it in our report, it was a local law enforcement agency account. And in doing that, they believed, and there's perhaps even political or legal theory, that they were able to skirt Proposition 22, which was to prevent those actions of the state taking money from local governments, or in fact shifting them or borrowing them. The language is pretty certain about how to do that. But the governor's office, for whatever reason, and the Senate and their council, for whatever reason, believed that they were able to get around that, and they've done that, and thus SB 89 shifts all those funds away. And what those funds are meant to then pay for are booking fees, COPS grants that cities receive up and down the state. But what makes our particular situation different, and quite frankly disproportionate, if not unequal, on its face, is that what has occurred is our amount that was taken from us, as well as Menifee, as well as Eastvale, as well as Rupa Valley, primarily the newly incorporated cities, is that we take, of our four cities, there's 15 million, we're $15 million of that $130 million shift. What it meant to other cities was that it was it hovered in the 4 to 5% of their general fund. In our case, it was 22%. On its face, that was a disproportionate share that we were, the burden that we were taking on. And that's where we're kind of in this quandary on where to go. So as an update for the public, as well as for the sake of discussion here, is after Thursday, I came back into the office, and all the newly incorporated cities immediately had an emergency meeting. We had to do it over the phone because of our schedules. And we started trying to look for solutions. What is it that we are going to do to try to correct this? And our first response was, one, get on the phone, have this emergency meeting, figure out what's going on, and then make sure that there's no other accounting shifts that are occurring as a result of this bill. But more importantly is that the fact that we don't have any representation in Sacramento was to hire a lobbying firm. And you ratified that contract tonight, is that we hired Anthony Gonzalez and Sons to represent our interest in Sacramento and to potentially correct this from a legislative standpoint. So that is on track right now. That is moving forward. The next phone call that I made was to our city attorney to see if there was any legal remedies here. Was there anything from a legal standpoint that the city could do, or the combined cities in Riverside County could do to correct this? And as most attorneys, they always answer, maybe. And it depends. So they immediately went to work and looking at how, if any way, there was a legal avenue to correct this. And as you know, today we went into closed session to talk about some of those things. And obviously we have not come up with anything that were any actions in that regard, but there was discussion about the legalities of what took place as a result of SB 89 being signed into law. The third thing that I did was, being that I come from Northern California and I have a wife that works at the Department of Finance, I literally beat the bushes and trying to figure out, is there anybody that I can talk to from the bureaucracy that would have something to say or could potentially guide us in a direction that would help in this regard. And one of the individuals that I called immediately because of his expertise in local governance and land use was a consultant for the Senate Governance Committee, Peter Detweiler, who some people know him by because he's helped in corporations, and he's considered kind of the preeminent expert in local land use law in the state of California. And strangely enough, years and years ago when I was in Sacramento, I actually took a class from him. So I was able to call him and talk to him directly. And Unfortunately, most of the answers I got was, sorry, Frank, but I can't help you. However, let me give you some information that might be able to help. And we bantered some ideas back and forth. He gave me some other contacts that I should probably get a hold of, if for no other reason than to start the process of educating people that were, quite frankly, not part of the process that the Senate that took place in the Senate at the time that the bill was being drafted. I contacted somebody from the Legislative Analyst's Office, the LAO's office. I contacted somebody from the Department of Finance, a couple of people from the Department of Finance, and was able to actually have conversations with these two individuals who have significant influence over the processing of these actions. And basically what they told me was, well, the legislation is what it is, but here's some thoughts about what can and can't be done. And again, it was more theoretical in nature than it was practical that could help us. But given that we have a legislative track that's going on, and these are the people that they would actually be talking to from the Department of Finance to implement if there was a solution, at least we made them aware of what the situation was in Southwest Riverside County. So that took place, and I thought it was fairly helpful in that regard. Something has happened. Well, and then the fourth thing, and I'll say this, and then I'll kind of give you the breakdown of some things that have transpired since. Is that the fourth thing that we did is I immediately, after hours and before work days and everything else, I was on the phone pretty regularly with our own Gary, our expert in finance, Gary Nordquist, because clearly this was something that him or I, and all our collective years of experience working in local government, I've never had that much money taken out from under our city in a 24-hour period. I've dealt with reductions over time. Those you can deal with. There's enough management science out there to deal with those things. I've never had it done this quickly and in this manner, quite frankly. So Gary and I immediately started looking at all the possible solutions and internally what we could potentially do. I will tell you that we've trimmed the budget down pretty tight in terms of what we did in this year's budget. We'd have to look for big targets, and the reason I called a special meeting is, one, because I wanted you to hear legally what your options were if there was some way to stay this and not even allow SB 89 to take effect. But secondly, in open session, have a conversation about what we need to be thinking about in terms of stabilizing our own budget. And that's the conversation that I want to have with you today. So at least we get some direction on whether or not we're 100 degrees off from what your thinking is, or there's some kind of alignment in terms of where we go from today going forward to balance the budget. Because with the $1.8 million loss, the budget you passed in June, we are out of balance. And so I'm hoping to get some of that discussion going today. And this is not unlike the parks discussion, quite frankly, just in a much larger, I think I was even quoted in the paper saying that the parks issue was really pennies compared to what we're dealing with now. I do believe there is a solution there. The solutions are going to be a bit painful, much more painful than we've seen in the past, but that's something that, quite frankly, as an administrator in a municipal agency, I've been doing for years, and in contrast to the state, they haven't done for years because they certainly haven't figured out how to balance their budgets. So I'll stop there with only one more comment, and that is just a quick update about the legislative side, is that last week we really thought we were on an island, because as it turns out, whether it's coincidence or by accident, or actually whether it was intentional or whether it was an accident, it just so happens that all the cities that were hurt the most were all from Southwest Riverside County. They were all cities that were represented by Republicans, who, I don't have to tell you that if you read the paper, these were all individuals that were not getting along quite well with the governor's office in the negotiation of the larger budget. What's changed since then, and I have to admit I hadn't put two and two together because I knew about it from last week, that the city of East Los Angeles has been attempting to incorporate for the last 4.5 years. And they, given this new scenario, quite frankly, wouldn't be able to incorporate. And the difference being is that the raw politics of it, if you will, is that East Los Angeles is a largely Democratic, well, represented by all Democrats. It's in a very different part of Southern California, and it really is quite frankly, the opposite of what we're dealing with in Riverside County. So it appears we might actually have potentially, if there is a legislative fix, there may be bipartisan support for legislation because there's now wider interest involved in this larger debate about BLF and BLF funding. So I've talked to our lobbyist today, and in short, his discussion was, we don't have anything yet, but the ball is rolling, and we're at least having conversations about it. It's not a dead issue in Sacramento, and so we're continuing to keep this conversation going with the potential for a legislative solution. And that's where we're at right now. And so I would end my comments, and I can fill in the gaps as we go through this conversation.
Do we have any public comments?